is when we look at how we measure attachment, the sort of analogy that keeps coming to my mind is how we measure physical growth. So how often do you look at your kid and go, oh my gosh, they just shot up and I didn't notice it? Or somebody who hasn't seen them in a while says, oh my gosh, they got so big. And, yeah, sometimes we measure them with a ruler. We, stand them against the wall, or we take them to the doctor's office. But other times the way that you measure is, like, I distinctly remember the day that my son could reach the second floor button in the speech therapist's office with his elbow, because of course COVID, so we're using elbows and without having to jump and without having to struggle. And I went, oh my gosh, she's grown. And I think you can do the same thing with attachment. Like, oh, one day you look and go, something changed, and it wasn't, I didn't notice it when it happened. I didn't realize it was incremental and slow, but it happened. And I think we do the same thing with physical growth. So for me, that's helpful to think.
So Dina, and you use these terms that I think Marissa's kind of going off of, the signals or the markers of transition and the markers of attachment. I'm guessing things like the kid using the word home, or the kid calling you mom or whatever. Could you just kind of give us more of a sense of what these markers, these usual markers might be of transition and of attachment?
Yeah, and Marissa may want to answer and add to some of this too.
Yeah.
And I would say again that there are many, many, many symbols and markers. And we miss a lot of them if we're wrapped up in what we think are the right markers. And so I always hesitate to give specifics without giving the caveat first to say, I could sit here and spend 30 minutes giving you a list, and I'm still going to miss the ones that will probably pop up for you. And so making sure, again, it's this constant process, I think, internally as parents, that we are checking ourselves and saying, do I have rigid measuring structures? Do I have a very small view of what this could look like? Am I talking to other people who've done this, or listening to podcasts or reading things that challenge how I'm measuring things or what I'm looking for, that could give me a broader sense of what's happening? Marissa, I know you said something about Facebook group. We have a secret Facebook group in East Texas for foster and adoptive parents, and it's a significant support system, one of the biggest. And people will put out all the time, this is what's going on. Has anybody experienced this? And so often I see people giving great tips, and at the same time they'll say, hey, but also remember, that means they're connected. And being able to take that in and hold on to that. And this is where we fight maybe some splitting on things are either good or bad with our kids. Our kids are either doing well or they're not. And we learn how to integrate those and say, we are continuing to push and struggle and build. And we are also looking for signs and symbols that growth and attachment and connection and healing are happening. All of that's happening in one space. And so, yes, Sky, new language, new willingness to say things, willingness to push back if the child has been withdrawn, willingness to pause if they are more aggressive, anything that is counterintuitive to the way they've been doing it. If you know that there are some attachment issues, is oftentimes a symbol of more secure attachment. When things shift, whatever they're using to balance their own little worlds, when that shifts and they're not doing it the same anymore, whether that's what they're calling people or what they're willing to try or what they're willing to do, or that they don't push back so many times, right? That it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 no's instead of 2 hours of no's, right? That we gauge those, and we do take the moments to celebrate those and notice them as growth and not just the other thing that I keep having to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I just want to, and this sort of shifting gears, but not really, but I want to mention that I think one of the things that happens with foster parents, and we've kind of touched on this a few times, is that the way that the system measures things, and I'm always thinking, because I do so much system level advocacy, that's always where my brain goes, but the way that the system measures things and the expectation of the system, and when I say the system right now, I'm meaning the CPS workers and the agencies and the people who are part of that process, that the way that they measure and the expectations they have of parents and of how kids are going to respond often colors the way we view ourselves, the way we evaluate ourselves, the way we measure what's happening with the kids. And sometimes we feel that expectation that we have to be the perfect parent and not just the good enough parent, or we have to, oh, well, the CPS worker expected me to rush in and do this thing, or they said because they didn't call me mom, or they didn't respond in this way, that means they're not attached. And so there's all that sort of self-judging and self-thinking about how, what is expected of us from outside of just the family unit. I think that impacts how we respond to kids too. So.
This is kind of a, kind of a side. I have a lot of, kind of joking what I call pro tips in these situations too. And one of the things, it's so hard to be a foster and adoptive parent especially when you're an adoptive parent and the adoption isn't finalized yet. So when you are actively involved in the broader system that you're talking about, and you get this feedback from them, it can be so difficult because it feels like at any moment the rug can be pulled out from under you. And that's worse for the kids too, right? And so you want to walk a fine line and be careful. And one of the pro tips that I suggest is talking with people who have advocated for themselves. And everyone on this call knows Stacy and Marissa, both of you have a history of doing this and of teaching other people how to advocate, which is so wonderful, because giving language for that too, but asking questions like, a lot of times people who are working in the system, depending on what their training levels are, God bless all of them, right? Because their jobs are difficult. So I'm not disparaging anyone's credentials, but frequently they have bachelor's level degrees or non-clinical degrees. And they have been trained to ask certain questions or to look for very specific markers for things that are much more complicated than they have been provided training for. That's not just their fault. And you have the ability to hold that same connective and non-pushing line, but also ask for help or ask for additional eyes on things. So if someone, who is not a clinician were to say, well, they're not doing this, this, and this, so they're not attached, I would say, may I please, can we ask the counselor to speak to this and give you an evaluation of this? Because I would like for them to adjust, because there's some other markers I've seen that might not be the case. And you can ask for help. Always phrase it. Pro tip is ask for help always. Can you help me? Because I've seen some other things and I've been talking to the counselor about it. Could we ask the counselor to provide a written note about attachment right now? If you feel like something's off, can you help me? Is the start of magical questions in these realms without overstepping or pushing back or frustrating your caseworkers.
I love this idea of pro tips, Dina. That's awesome. And just to highlight what you said there, that these markers are a part of a process. They're very individual for each kid and each family unit, and noticing the change is kind of your pro tip. It's not like this set in stone, these 5 markers, but any kind of change that gives you kind of an intuitive feel like they're settling into this a little bit more. They're feeling a little bit more secure. There was a 8-minute tantrum instead of a 20-minute tantrum, and they let me hug them afterwards. Or Stacy's, they said, she said no and then didn't come back, and we had the sense that she was kind of feeling okay about saying no without feeling afraid that we were going to be mad or she had hurt us or feeling guilty or something, that she was coming into her own with that. So these markers are all kind of part of the process, and it's the stream keeps on moving. Stacy, anything to jump in here with
when Marissa said the system judges you, I thought of an example that every parent, foster parent or not, will recognize, and that is potty training. I had a guardian ad litem tell me once, I had a 3.5, almost 4-year-old, why isn't she potty trained? She's been in your home 6 months. Why isn't she potty trained? Well, because we're working on other things. We're working on, what is a hug? We're working on, it's okay to say no. We're working on, and it was a guardian ad litem, and I don't think they'd ever had a kid. And it was just, and sometimes you get social workers who obviously have never had children, and different kids potty train at different times, whether they're biological or foster. If they're foster, they're likely to potty train a lot later. There are certain things you work on controlling before you work on controlling that. And that is one aspect where everybody in the world will judge you if they see your 5-year-old wearing a pull-up. And I mean, it's just, I've gotten a lot of judgment on that particular issue from the system. And I know that I now know, having done this for 15 years, that maybe what these social workers are trained in school to say, this is what's supposed to happen at 2, happens at 5 for my child. And that's what's best for my child. And you gotta be comfortable with the idea that, like, we're talking about measuring sticks. It's not even this is not a race. There's not a finish. This is a journey, and there are various stops along the way. And maybe you spent 2 hours at Yellowstone and somebody else went straight to the Grand Canyon. You know, that's just how your journey went. And you have to be comfortable with the fact that everybody's journey with their children is going to look different.
And with those, you know, and again, and I'm really big on equipping parents for these responses too, because you're right, potty training is one of those big ones. And I've worked with a few families and pulled a little research, and I said, you know, it's another pro tip. It's always great when, again, a lot of times what we're dealing with is people who have been trained very specifically with items to look for concerns. And quite frankly, that can be something of concern in foster homes that could be a problem, right? If children aren't potty trained in a normal age range, it could be an indication that the social worker, especially a new one, might need to ask extra questions. That's a hard scenario. Another pro tip is research says is a great thing to start with, because when you can add that and provide that you've done some work in this, it quells their response on if you're neglectful. Because if you know what's going on and you can give more words to it than they can, it shows them your intentionality, which is oftentimes what they're looking for, whether they know it or not, is the intentionality of the foster home. Are you doing all the things for the child that you can? And so when someone says they're almost 4, they're 4, why aren't they potty trained? To say, I know, right? Some kids are really late. Research says some kids aren't even ready to start until 4. And there is a physical component to the brain where they have to be able to connect to the bladder. For some kids, that doesn't happen until right at preschool age. So I'm kind of gauging that to track what's going on here, but we're just trying to make sure that she knows that we're going to work with her at her developmental level. And if it gets to an age where it's completely out of the bell curve, I'll take her to the doctor. That answers the question, right?
All right, I'm going to print that one out. We're just going
that was brilliant.
that everybody memorize that. I know, right?
Yeah.
Research says.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anytime that we can take something that feels like anytime that someone from the system feels like it's you versus me, if you can take it and put yourself on the same team as them, it answers the question every time. I know, right? Another great response. And here's what I'm doing about it. And that shows them that you're seeing some of the same things. It's not, and that's an internal thing for us a lot of times, because when someone says, why hasn't this happened yet? My initial response is, get off my back. You know, it bristles me too. And that's working us to go, get on the same team, right? Communicate that we're seeing some of the same things. And assuming the best about the other side. And sometimes we do get into issues that are bigger and beyond this, but so often everyone working on these cases most of the time has the very best of intentions. And we can end up in disagreements and discord that create issues for our kids too because of that, if we aren't self-regulating in our own situations and we're feeling that tension and leaning into the tension instead of rerouting it for same team. This is still all about the kids. Because the truth is, she doesn't need to be rushed to be potty trained, probably. And if you can get on the same team, then you've got some more space with that, and it's better for her.
And can I give you a foster parenting tip on this that is not a psychologist tip? Keep everybody on the team informed of what you are doing. I like to send a team email every so often with some pictures of the kids, just letting them know what we're working on, so they aren't thinking we're not working on anything.
That is a great tip.
It is. I think that both of those are it's so important to recognize that you mentioned intentionality, Dina, that they're looking to see, did you notice that she's 4 and she's not potty trained? Are you aware of that and working or looking at it and considering what your options are? You know, maybe not pushing the child towards it, but aware of the issues that could be around it, as opposed to, that hadn't occurred to me, for not potty training. I mean, most parents would know that, but I think that they're looking to see that you know and that you're conscious of it and kind of paying attention to it. So sometimes that can help me back off a little bit of the defensive, like, they think I'm supposed to be perfect and have this done and I don't, and they are looking at that developmental milestone going, that was supposed to happen at 2 or 3, so yeah.
I love this idea of, I know, right? That it's this not taking it personally and saying, yes, I see the same thing that you're seeing. I find that to be a really helpful thing too. If somebody's coming at me with a critique, the first thing I want to do is see if I can agree with it. Yeah, I really can be that way. Yeah, thanks for noticing. What ideas do you have about how I could do that differently? And I love this idea of getting them on the team, but it's very hard. Marissa, of course, you put your heart and your soul in this, and it feels like somebody's coming in and critiquing or judging, and so rolling with that, and enlisting to get them on your side so that you can be on the same team. This is thrilling. I think we've got 3 good podcasts out of this time. Stacy, Marissa, and Dina, where do you think, based on what came up here, what do you think some of the topics for our next conversation might be?
I think one of the things Marissa brought up that I would love to make sure we cover is talking to kids about their histories, their stories, the questions people ask about when do I tell them they're adopted, or how do I talk to them about it, or what does this look like, and really diving into that. We've done a lot of work around that here, and I'd love to be able to talk and unpack some of that.
Yeah, I think that we could do several on just on, because there's one about how do you talk to kids in care, or what do you do when they start telling you their history, and their trauma, and and that's often which you may not know because the worker didn't tell you. And then there's the how do you handle the adoption questions, and how do you handle other people's questions, and then there's the I was thinking of another one. It just went out of my head. Working with birth families, and at what point do you reach out to them, and how do you handle that, and all of those questions. I get lots of questions about all those things. So